The phone call came at 3:47 a.m. on a rain-soaked November morning in 1967, but Dean Martin had been waiting for it his entire adult life. "Your father is dying," his sister Angela whispered through long-distance static from Steubenville. "He's asking for you, Dino. He says he has something to tell you before." Her voice broke. Dean stared at the receiver in his Beverly Hills mansion, surrounded by gold records and industry awards that had never earned him the one thing he'd craved most, his father's respect. Gaetano Crocetti, the stubborn Italian barber who'd spent 40 years calling his son's career una stupidaggine, foolishness, was finally ready to speak, but the confession waiting in that sterile hospital room would destroy everything Dean thought he knew about pride, sacrifice, and the price of a father's love. The November rain hammered against the windows of Steubenville General Hospital with the relentless rhythm of a funeral march. Inside room 314, the air was thick with the antiseptic smell of impending death and the unspoken weight of 4 decades of disappointment. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the harsh, clinical glow that made even healthy people look corpse-pale. The room held the standard fixtures of final chapters: wilted flowers from well-meaning neighbors, a barely touched dinner tray, and the steady electronic heartbeat of machines monitoring what little life remained in Gaetano Crocetti's 78-year-old body. Dean stood in the doorway, his expensive overcoat still dripping rainwater onto the hospital's worn linoleum floor. He hadn't been in this building since 1943, hadn't stood in his father's presence since 1961, hadn't spoken to the man since their last brutal argument about wasting your life making silly music for silly people. 6 years of silence stretched between them like a canyon carved by stubbornness and mutual disappointment. The figure in the hospital bed bore little resemblance to the proud, barrel-chested barber who'd once commanded respect throughout South 6th Street. Gaetano had shrunk to half his former size, his famous mustache reduced to gray wisps, his powerful hands once capable of wielding straight razors with surgical precision, now translucent and trembling against the white hospital sheets. But his eyes, those dark Crocetti eyes that Dean had inherited along with the family's legendary temper, still burned with the fierce intensity that had intimidated customers and sons alike for 7 decades. The relationship between Dean Martin and his father had soured like wine, left too long in the sun. When young Dino Crocetti first announced his intention to become a performer, Gaetano had reacted with the contempt of a man who'd built his life on honest labor and couldn't understand why his son would choose to make faces and sing songs instead of learning a respectable trade. "Music is for the church and weddings," Gaetano would growl in his broken English whenever neighbors mentioned Dean's growing fame. "A man works with his hands, not his mouth." Even as Dean's success grew from local nightclubs to national radio, from recording contracts to movie deals, from regional celebrity to international icon, Gaetano's disapproval never wavered. When Dean appeared on Ed Sullivan, when he recorded his first hit, when he starred in his first film, when he became one of the most recognizable faces in America, his father's response was always the same: a shrug of dismissal and a muttered comment about real work versus playing around. The breaking point had come in 1961, during Dean's last visit to Steubenville for his mother's funeral. Standing beside Angelina Crocetti's grave, Dean had tried one final time to bridge the gap with his father. "Papa," he'd said, "I know you don't approve, but I've made a good life. I can take care of you now. You don't have to work anymore." Gaetano had looked at his famous son with undisguised contempt. "Take care of me? With what? With money from making stupid faces on television? I would rather starve than live off your clown show." The words had hit Dean like physical blows, each syllable carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. They'd buried Dean's mother in silence, 2 men who shared blood and nothing else. Now 6 years later, Dean forced himself to walk across the linoleum floor toward his father's deathbed. Each step felt like walking through concrete, weighed down by the accumulated gravity of disappointment, anger, and the terrible knowledge that soon it would be too late for words that might heal anything. "Papa." Dean's voice came out rougher than intended. Gaetano's eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort on his son's face. For a moment, neither man spoke. The machines continued their electronic vigil, counting down the minutes remaining in a relationship that had never found its rhythm. Dino. Gaetano's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the same authoritative tone that had silenced arguments in the barber shop for 50 years. You came. Angela said you wanted to see me. See, I need. Gaetano struggled to sit up, his body fighting him even as his will remained strong. I need to tell you something before I die, something I should have told you long time ago. Dean remained standing, his arms crossed defensively. If you're going to tell me one more time that I wasted my life, no. The word came out with surprising force. No, that's not. Madonna mia, how do I say this? Gaetano's eyes filled with tears, something Dean had never seen in 40 years of living under his father's roof. I need to tell you the truth about your career, about what really happened. Dean's stomach tightened with a familiar dread. What do you mean? Gaetano gestured weakly toward the bedside table. In the drawer, there's an envelope. Bring it to me. Puzzled, Dean opened the drawer and found a manila envelope, yellowed with age and worn from handling. Inside were dozens of documents, letters, receipts, and photographs that Dean didn't recognize. Gaetano took the envelope with shaking hands and began spreading its contents across his chest with the careful deliberation of a man laying out evidence. 1946, Gaetano began, his voice growing stronger as he found his purpose. You came home from New York, remember? You were broke, angry, ready to give up the music. You said the agents, they don't understand you, they don't give you the good chances. Dean remembered. It had been the lowest point of his career, when every door in New York seemed locked against him, when he'd seriously considered returning to Steubenville permanently and taking over his father's barber shop. You remember what happened next? Gaetano asked. I got lucky. Lou Perry gave me a chance at the Glass Hat Club. My break came out of nowhere. Gaetano's laugh was bitter. Nowhere. Sigh. That's what I let you think. He held up a faded receipt with trembling fingers. Lou Perry. He didn't give you a chance because of your talent. Figlio mio. He gave you a chance because I paid him $500 to listen to you sing. Dean felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. What? $500. 3 months of cutting hair, saving every penny. I told Lou Perry that if he didn't give you a real audition, a fair audition, I would tell everyone in Little Italy that his club was no good for Italian performers. But if he gave you the chance and you were good, I would send every customer from my shop to hear you sing. Dean stared at his father, unable to process what he was hearing. That was just the beginning. Gaetano's fingers moved to another document, a letter written in careful English on barbershop letterhead. 1948, when you were trying to get that recording contract with Diamond Records. You remember how long it took? How they kept saying maybe, maybe, maybe. Dean nodded mutely. I wrote letters. 50 letters to 50 people, telling them my son was the best singer in America, that they would be fools not to sign him. I didn't sign them Gaetano Crocetti. I signed them with fake names. Radio station managers, club owners, music critics. I made them think everyone in the business was talking about Dean Martin. Each revelation hit Dean like a physical blow. Papa, why are you telling me this? Because I'm dying, and I can't die with these secrets. Gaetano's voice broke completely. There's more, Dino. So much more. He pulled out a photograph Dean had never seen. His father shaking hands with a well-dressed man outside a New York nightclub. 1950. This is Mickey Rudin, the agent who became your manager. You think he found you by accident. I tracked him down, followed him for 3 days, learned what restaurants he ate at, what bars he drank at. Then I accidentally met him, started talking about my son who was going to be the biggest star in America. Papa, I bought him drinks, I bought him dinners, I told him stories about your talent until he agreed to come see you perform. And when he did, when he signed you, I made him promise never to tell you how the meeting really happened. Dean's legs felt weak. He sat down heavily in the room's single visitor chair, staring at his father as if seeing him for the first time. Every break you got, every opportunity, every time you thought luck was finding you, it was me. Gaetano's confession poured out like water through a burst dam. I spent 40 years working in secret, writing letters, making phone calls, paying people to give you chances. When you joined with Jerry Lewis, I made sure the right people knew about your act. When you went solo, I helped spread word about your records. When you got your television show, I organized fan mail campaigns from barbershops across Ohio. But you always said," Dean's voice came out as a whisper, "you always said my career was foolishness. You said I was wasting my life." Gaetano's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I said those things because I was scared, Dino. Scared that if I showed how proud I was, it would somehow jinx your success. Scared that if people knew how much I loved watching you sing, they would think I was just a proud father, not a man who really knew talent when he heard it." The confession continued like a flood. Gaetano had attended dozens of Dean's performances over the years, always sitting in the back, always leaving before Dean could see him. He'd collected every magazine article, every newspaper review, every photograph. He'd organized boycotts of radio stations that didn't play Dean's records, and quietly supported disc jockeys who did. "When you married Jean, I sent her flowers every month for a year, but I signed the cards, a fan. When your children were born, I put money in bank accounts for their college education, but I made sure the bank would never tell you where it came from." Dean was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he tried to reconcile 40 years of perceived rejection with this impossible revelation of secret support. "Papa, why? Why did you let me think you disapproved? Why did you let me hate you for not supporting me?" Gaetano reached out with one trembling hand and touched his son's face. "Because I was a proud, stupid old man who thought that showing love made you weak. Because I grew up in the old country where fathers didn't hug their sons or tell them they were proud. Because I was afraid that if I told you how much I loved you, how much I believed in you, you would stop trying so hard to prove yourself. Papa." Dean took his father's hand in both of his own. "I spent my whole life trying to make you proud. Every song I sang, every show I did, every award I won, I was always hoping you would finally say it was worth something. You want to know what I really thought?" Gaetano's voice grew stronger, fueled by the need to finally speak his truth. "I thought you were magic, Dino. From the time you were a little boy humming while you helped me sweep hair in the shop, I knew you had something special. When I heard you sing for the first time, really sing, I cried like a baby. I knew my son was going to touch people's hearts the way great music is supposed to do." "Then why?" "Because I was terrified that if I told you how special you were, you would get a big head and stop working hard. Because I thought that keeping you hungry, keeping you fighting for approval, would make you a better performer. Because I was an old fool who thought that love made people soft." The machines monitoring Gaetano's vital signs began beeping more rapidly. Dean could see his father's strength fading with each word, but the old man pressed on, desperate to finish his confession. "You want to know the truth, Figlio? Every night for 40 years I listened to your records before I went to sleep. Every time I heard your voice on the radio, I told everyone in the barber shop, 'That's my son. That's my Dino.' Every time I saw you on television, I stood up and applauded in my living room like you could see me. Papa, please don't talk anymore. Save your strength. No, I have to finish. I have to tell you about the proudest day of my life." Gaetano's eyes grew distant, focused on a memory that had sustained him for years. 1965, when you performed at Carnegie Hall. I was there, Dino. Front row, center section. I wore my best suit, the one I got married in. When you walked out on that stage, and the whole audience stood up to applaud, when they gave you a standing ovation before you even opened your mouth, I thought my heart would explode with pride. Dean remembered that night, remembered scanning the audience before he began singing and thinking he'd glimpsed a familiar face in the front row, but convincing himself it was impossible. That was you. That was me. And when you finished that last song, when you took your bow and the whole place went crazy, I stood on my chair and yelled, 'Bravo, bravo,' louder than anyone else in that theater. The people around me, they looked at me like I was crazy, this old Italian man screaming his head off. But I didn't care. I wanted the whole world to know that the greatest performer on that stage was my son." The heart monitor's beeping was growing irregular, more urgent. Dean could feel his father slipping away. But Gaetano had one more secret to share. "There's something else in that envelope, Dino. The most important thing." With great effort, Gaetano pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellow with age and worn soft from repeated handling. He pressed it into Dean's hands with the last of his strength. Dean unfolded the paper carefully, and found himself looking at a handwritten letter, dated just 2 weeks earlier, addressed to the management of Capitol Records. "Dear Sirs," the letter began in Gaetano's careful script. "I am writing to tell you about my son, Dean Martin, who I believe is the greatest singer in the world. I know I am just an old barber from Ohio, but I have listened to music my whole life, and I have never heard anyone who can touch people's hearts the way my boy can. He makes people happy when they are sad. He makes them dance when they are tired. He makes them believe in love when they have given up hope. If you are smart business people, you will give him every chance to share his gift with the world, because gifts like his come along once in a lifetime. With respect and pride, Gaetano Crocetti, father of Dean Martin." Dean stared at the letter, overwhelmed by the realization that even now, even at the end, his father was still fighting for his career, still believing in his talent, still working behind the scenes to support the son he'd never been able to embrace publicly. "Papa," Dean whispered, "I love you. I have always loved you, and I forgive you for everything." Gaetano smiled, the first genuinely peaceful expression Dean had ever seen on his father's face. "And I love you, Dino. I have loved you since the day you were born, and I will love you until the stars fall from the sky. You made me the proudest father who ever lived." Those were the last words Gaetano Crocetti ever spoke. He closed his eyes with that smile still on his face and slipped quietly away, finally at peace with the secret he'd carried for 4 decades. Dean sat beside his father's body for hours, holding the old man's hand and reading through the envelope's contents. 40 years of secret support, hidden sacrifices, and undeclared love. Every harsh word, every apparent rejection, every moment of perceived disapproval had been a mask covering a father's desperate attempts to help his son succeed while preserving his own complicated dignity. At Gaetano's funeral 3 days later, Dean stood at the podium in St. Anthony's Church and spoke to a congregation filled with customers from the barber shop, neighbors from South 6th Street, and old Italian immigrants who remembered when the Crocetti family first arrived in Steubenville. "My father was a proud man," Dean began, his voice steady despite his grief. "He was proud of his work, proud of his heritage, and proud of his family. But what I didn't know until this week was how proud he was of me. For 40 years he supported my career in secret while criticizing it in public. He helped me succeed while pretending to disapprove. He loved me fiercely while acting like my dreams disappointed him." Dean paused, looking out at the faces of people who had known both versions of his father, the public skeptic and the private supporter. "I spent my adult life trying to earn my father's approval, never knowing I'd had it all along. I thought his silence meant disapproval, when it actually meant he was working behind the scenes to make sure I had every opportunity to succeed. The greatest performance of his life wasn't cutting hair or telling stories in his shop. It was pretending not to care about the thing that mattered most to him, his son's happiness." After the funeral, Dean made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He bought his father's barber shop and had it restored exactly as it had been in Gaetano's day. But instead of reopening it as a business, he turned it into a small museum dedicated to the immigrants who had built Steubenville's Little Italy community. On the wall behind the old barber chair, Dean hung a single photograph, Gaetano Crocetti standing proudly next to a young Dean Martin, both of them smiling, both of them looking genuinely happy to be together. Underneath the photo was a simple plaque that read, "In memory of fathers who love so deeply they're afraid to show it, and sons who succeed because someone believed in them, even when they didn't know it." The night his father died, Dean learned that the most profound love often wears the mask of indifference, and the greatest gifts come from people who give them anonymously, expecting nothing in return except the joy of seeing someone they love achieve their dreams.